We are about to embark on an immersive journey through the corridors of our minds. Stand by as we prepare for departure.
Welcome aboard, everyone, to the Productivity with Peace of Mind podcast adventure. Our journey will begin in just a moment. Inhale deeply and exhale. Our voyage takes us on a captivating tour, diving deep into the intricate layers of our thoughts and imagination. Brace yourselves for the complexities of our evolution. For a safe and enjoyable journey, stay seated, secure your helmet and protective goggles, and keep hands, feet, and legs inside while the ride is moving. Now relax and enjoy.
What if I told you every experience you have, good or bad, is telling you something? In this episode, a highly ambitious nurse shares with us tools and tips on how to balance our health with our long term goals, prioritize our overall well being, and accept that our path may not always be perfectly linear. I'll also share a link in the show notes with you to be able to get access to a downloadable workbook so that you can work through some of the things that she shares with us because this is just so good. I want you to get the most out of it. So, without further ado, let's go to the conversation. Rachel is a nurse currently working in the ICU in the Chicago area and as an implementation manager at a small telehealth startup. She holds an undergraduate degree in nursing and psychology and a master's in international business. Her professional background ranges from clinical bedside to healthcare operations and informatics. In her free time, she likes to watch movies and spend time cooking with her two dogs and partner at home. I love the variety of your background here, Rachel. Tell us a little bit more about your story and where you're coming from.
Yeah, thanks for asking and for having me to be on your podcast.
Yeah, it's so great to
Um,
have you.
yeah, so I just a little bit more broadly about my background. When I initially started as a nurse, I started in the ICU and I kind of jumped between a couple different specialties. So I did like post-surgery care, I did a little stint in the emergency room and urgent care. And none of that kind of felt like it, after a while, felt like it was super fulfilling. So I started to think about looking at maybe some different career paths, which have kind of led me to do a little bit of experimentation. So I did a brief year that I spent in finance while I was working on getting my international business degree. And then when COVID broke out, I went back to nursing bedside. And then once I finished my international business degree, I was really looking to transition into the business space. So I started to work in clinical operations with DaVita. And then I just kind of had some big life changes that I needed to make. And so needed a little bit more flexibility in my life and changed back to clinical nursing. And then did some travel nursing, and then have recently transitioned again as I'm looking to move away from the bedside to working at the telehealth startup as kind of a bridge away from more bedside.
I know we had talked previously when we were having a conversation about this episode that we've both kind of had this, complex, interesting career path where it's not exactly been linear. So can you talk about how you've navigated all these challenges and maybe what motivated the changes each time or how you knew when it was time to change or even right now when you're looking at a yet again transition, how you're in kind of in touch with yourself as far as like, yeah, it's time to try something new again.
Yeah, I think I'm smiling because I think sometimes that life just kind of makes some of those decisions for you at certain points. I think I think the big thing for me, like it was kind of a big deal when I stepped away from nursing the first time. And I think a big part of that was because there's kind of the prescribed route in the nursing career pipeline
Um,
of, okay, you go to nursing school, you graduate, you work bedside for a couple of years. And then if you're not already specialized, then you specialize, and then maybe you consider going to like nurse practitioner school, and then you graduate and work as a nurse practitioner. Well, I just felt like that didn't fit me very well.
yeah.
And part of the way that I figured that out is because I went to nurse practitioner school for a year. And I was like, initially thinking that that would be the change that I needed, moving away from bedside. And as I kind of got through some of my schooling, I just really recognized that it felt very similar in nature to what I was doing. And the components of the role that were present as a nurse practitioner kind of had all of the pieces that I liked the least about nursing. And so it kind of took looking through that and having a lot of conversations with some good friends to make the decision that I needed to look at other career opportunities. And so I kind of did an experiment and made a little bit of a quick jump to that international business degree. And while I don't know that I would say I'm using that degree at the moment, but I would say it was a good jump for me because it gave me exposure to a lot of different things that I hadn't thought about before. And it kind of opened up just my network of different people working in different industries that I didn't really have background or exposure to. So from that perspective, it was really helpful. I think the other big thing as I think about like changes and ways that I had to kind of adapt was when I had to go back to nursing the first time. And I would say that, COVID aside, that I wouldn't really count because that was kind of extraordinary situation, you know. But when I returned after DaVita, where it was like you get your first job, I got my first job, but that wasn't bedside and wasn't in a clinical role. And it was like, wow, okay, I've made it. And then when I had to kind of step back into the nursing role, because I felt like that it, I loved the position and I liked what I was doing. But I felt like it didn't provide me with the level of career advancement that I would have wanted. And
Hmm.
I think it's hard when you're kind of someone who has a lot of different skill sets to kind of fit in some of those more prescribed roles because there's this whole other skill set that that you have that you're just not using. So I think that that's one of the things that kind of motivated me to take a step back and go back into clinical nursing in a different specialty to kind of get some new skills, but just to do a little bit of reevaluation and having some time to think about, okay, how do I want to redirect this career path?
I love that. And I think, it just goes to show that actually taking action and taking a step in a direction, even if you figure out, hey, this piece over here actually isn't for me, but I learned more and more deeply about what actually works for me, what I actually like. And so I love those examples because it really kind of paints that picture of what that can look like. And so tell me a little bit about like talk about flexibility and how that plays in because we it also speaks to your self-awareness, right? To be able to recognize that, hey, I'm ready for a change, and then listen to those nudges, follow that path, figure out what works next. How do you then be flexible as you navigate those changes and as you kind of figure out, okay, like this is going to be new. This is going to be uncomfortable. There's going to be things that I might not recognize or necessarily know right away how to handle. It's kind of like, if you do something, the same career, the same job, the same position for 10, 20, 30 years, you can almost go on autopilot. But for
Mhm.
those of us who you talk about all these interests, it's like being a multi-passionate individual or professional, that doesn't fill you up. And it just kind of drains us, right? So talk about the flexibility piece and how that part shows up for you.
That one's like a very interesting one to consider because I think in my life, I'm always looking for like roles that provide me with a certain level of flexibility as well,
Yeah.
because I know that like I don't fit in a box very well.
Yeah.
Right? Um, so I think some of it with like the flexibility, I think I think a good portion of it is just like being open to change and sometimes just like getting the ball rolling. You
Mhm.
know, it's hard. Like in hindsight, you can look back and say, oh, yeah, like maybe I shouldn't have done that. Or like, yes, this was a really good step for me to take. But it's hard to know that in the
Yeah.
moment. I think sometimes it's like looking for those opportunities of, hey, what are the things that I feel like I could grow in this role and maybe it's not hitting everything, you know? So like
Mhm.
when I think about stepping back into my nursing role, I knew that it was like it was going to feel like a step backwards. I knew that it
Yeah.
wasn't going to feel good, but I looked for something that would stimulate me mentally. So that was like changing specialties that I was working in. So picking up a new skill set in that way. And so even though it may not give me all of the things that I wanted in a particular role, it allows me to kind of pick out some of that skill set and decide, okay, this maybe will serve me in the future. And therefore, it could be a good fit. And I think a lot of it too, like when I think about the emotional piece of kind of stepping back into something that doesn't feel very good, is I think realizing that it's temporary or
Yeah.
kind of thinking about how you want to use that and that it's not like a reflection of your overall progress. It's a step, you know, it's not the whole thing.
Right, right. Well, I mean, think those are such great mindset shifts that you can, adapt and practice because there's one way you could go through and have all these changes and make these transitions and kind of resist and be frustrated and have some negative thoughts around it that don't necessarily serve us. Or you can have that mindset, like you said, of, this might be temporary. This might not all be exactly what I want, but I'm going to find those nuggets. And right, it's like it's very much focusing on, what's in your control. And that allows you to take that journey with a lot more ease than resistance, right?
Yeah, I think it's so important to find that time for reflection and finding those things like what are the things that are serving me here. So I definitely feel like that's something and like how can I use that? How can I use what I've learned or how can I
Mm.
use the new education that I've gotten in this role?
I love that. So now let's shift it a little bit. I know when we talk about nursing career, if someone who's listening is in a healthcare career, they may relate directly, but anyone else who has a very like highly demanding job or career or is building a business or is a professional that just has so many demands in their everyday life or long hours, long schedules, balancing our health with that demanding workload and work environment can be very tricky to navigate. So how have you prioritized, being a nurse, having these, maybe not, checklist, autopilot roles, but these more demanding roles that require a lot of you? How do you still prioritize your health, both emotionally, mentally, and physically?
I think that's such a good question. I love this question actually. Um, so I guess when I think about this, I think a lot about what is it that it's being demanded of me? So
Mhm.
in nursing in particular, and I think most roles, it's time, right? It's time away from home. It's time actually like sitting there and doing whatever it is that you're working on or putting in extra hours. So when I think about things like that, you have to think about like how you want to prioritize things and recognize like how your own body is responding to that as well. So I think that that's kind of the biggest tell on when sometimes there needs to be change So I think like just some basic things that I try to do if I'm working super demanding schedule for a particular week is there anything that I can prepare like ahead of time? If I
Mhm.
have some free time, what can I do to set myself up for success during the week? For me, that often looks like meal prepping or something like that on the weekends. But I think it's also things like developing routines around like when you get home, when you're off the clock, you're a lot of times like very tired,
Mhm.
or very drained. And so sometimes having that sense of like routine or normalcy at home, I think contributes to kind of offloading some of the mental labor that you have to do when it's less planned. And being intentional about adding in some of those things that you know will help you. So it might be something small like make sure you're washing your face every night before you go to bed and doing your skincare routine, or taking time to like brush your hair. I just got like a new boar bristle brush. And so that's like my thing now. Okay, come home, get ready for bed, like brush out my hair. So I think kind of developing that level of routine helps with being able to manage like those more demanding schedules. But I think the other thing is realizing what areas you can kind of protect yourself around. So for instance, like for me in nursing, we've always been short, and I think that this
Mhm.
is chronically a problem in the professional world is just wanting more time than you're willing to give. And so thinking about how do I want to set some boundaries, for me, that looks like I will not work overtime. I don't
Yeah.
work overtime and I'm not going to pick it up. For other people who are working 9 to 5, maybe that would look more like I have firm boundaries on when I'm available and when I'm not, and I don't check my email when I'm at home or something like that, just to give yourself a time to rest from that demand.
Yeah, I love this idea that you're sharing around making it small because I notice a lot of people will wait until they have an entire day or an entire 8 hours or an entire week or 3 weeks. I don't know what they're waiting for, but I notice, and even in my career and in our teams, they'll say, "Oh, I don't have time to take PTO," for example. And I'm like, Why? Take a
Yeah.
Friday, right? Take a half day. Like there's always pockets I think that we can fit in. So I love this approach of make it small, make it easy, make it manageable. Do you have any advice on like how someone listening, if they're listening to these ideas that you're sharing, because they're such good ideas and they might be thinking, how do I find like what works for me? How do I figure out what the thing I could do to start being more in control of myself and start applying these? Like, where do I start?
I think the best place to start is kind of one, what feeds you, you know,
Mhm.
like what makes you feel good about your day? What puts you in a good mood? What are the things that make you feel good about the life that you're having? So like start there is what I would say. And then from there, I think it's looking at how can I work this into my day in a way that feels manageable? And I think that that's kind of the key thing. So like maybe that's like 5 minutes in the morning or like before you go to bed. So I think like finding the time and then being intentional about it. I think at the beginning, it feels like work. It does at the
Mhm.
beginning. Even some days you're like,
Yes.
oh, I just don't want to do it. But I think that sometimes I think it needs to be reassessed at that stage too, right? Like if it feels like work every time, then maybe it's not the right thing to choose and you need to like go back to your original list and look at something else. Because eventually I feel like it should get easier. And if it doesn't, then maybe reassess. But if it does get easier and you find that it really is adding that value into your life, then I find that sometimes you tend to make a little bit more time for it. I think
Yeah.
a bad tendency of like getting in a habit where you feel like you have no time. And so you don't prioritize the things that feed you. And then it feels like you can't. But then once you kind of start pouring into that cup again, it gets easier. One of the things that I think about when I'm looking at like, okay, what things feed me. So there's this framework that exists in psychology, and we have like gone over it in nursing school as well. It's called Maslow's hierarchy. And it's a pyramid. So for those of you who are just listening in online, I'll kind of run through and describe it for you. Basically, the bottom of the pyramid is set up where those are kind of your baseline needs, things that you absolutely have to get met. And then the top of the pyramid is things that you can only start to achieve or realize once you have everything on the bottom sector met. So, like the bottom sector is physiological needs. So these would be things like food, water, shelter, clothing, sleep is a big one. I think that a lot of people are lacking sometimes when we think about like our corporate lives. Then it's like safety and security. So I think this is part of where like finance would fall into, would be in this section of making sure that you can pay for the things that you need and you don't constantly feel like you're struggling. Then the next one is love and belonging is the next step up. And I think this is really about like your friendships, your sense of connection, your support group. And then the next one up from that is self-esteem. And I actually see a lot of potential for like jobs to impact this piece. Because this is where you see like confidence, achievements, the need to be recognized as a unique individual, respect between yourself and others. And then the last stage is self-actualization. So that would be at the top, and that's going to be things like creativity, spontaneity, inner purpose, inner potential, and meaning in the world. Think about like all of those things being met. I think about a lot of times, what are the physiological needs that I have? And those are kind of the base ones, like how can I contribute to those things and make sure that I have those covered. And if I don't have them covered, can I build them into a routine?
And all of those are so important, so valuable to us, and yet there's an order. There's a reason that our survival starts first, and then we have, meaning and significance at the top, because if we feel meaning and significance, but we're not eating and we don't have a roof over our head, it doesn't mean as much because, we're not thinking straight, we're not taken care of, and we're not able to, move from a calm, regulated, and managed state.
Yeah. Yeah. So I think about that a lot with like demanding jobs in particular,
Yeah.
right? They don't create a lot of space for
Yeah.
contributing to those things. And so when you think about it, it's like, oh, okay. Like for instance, I worked nights for several years as a nurse. So it's like, okay, my Maslow's hierarchy was so messed up. Like I wasn't sleeping because I was working nights. I wasn't eating on a regular schedule.
Mm.
I didn't have any like social interaction because I was on a completely different schedule than my social circle. People didn't really know you at work because they only saw you at night. So there was just like,
Mm.
you didn't have good interaction with your coworkers, so when you start thinking about it, like, okay, these are all the ways that it's like hitting, and then you're like, oh yeah, this is really impacting my life. Um,
Mhm.
then it makes sense to be like, here are the tangible ways that this job is potentially impacting my life. And maybe I need to switch things up to find something that better serves me.
Right. So how do you consider kind of those levels and those steps of that hierarchy? And for those of you listening, I'll have a link for you guys so you can download that a PDF and take a look at that and maybe start to assess like how is that showing up for you and how is that, how can you maybe make some shifts? So Rachel, what would you say as far as how have you used that tool in the context of setting your own goals or getting to that next step you want to go or looking at that career trajectory that you've been on?
I think maybe easiest would be to kind of like walk through an example and kind of go through each of them like one by one. When I'm thinking when I'm thinking about like a potential job, I'm a big like pros and cons girl. So this is like how I like to divide it up. Um,
Yes.
so things that I look at is okay, physiological needs, right? Is this job going to allow me to have like a regular schedule or like put boundaries around it? Or do I feel like this is something that's going to completely consume my life, you know?
Mhm.
Um, so is this something that's going to allow me to like sleep the way that I know I need to sleep? Um, and then, so that's kind of all in the physiological, right? Baseline. Sometimes a little bit harder to assess for jobs, sometimes a little bit easier. I think the nursing career is a little easy to look at that and kind of make a judgment on it. But I think you can ask like good questions around people, like to people who are in that role around things like this too. And then I think about like safety and security. So is this a position that I feel like has some longevity or not? Am I going to need to look for another job? And am I okay with accepting that risk or not? Do I feel like this job is going to impact my health in a negative way? And I think that that health piece kind of ties back to the physiological needs. You know, my health gets massively impacted from not having enough sleep.
Mhm.
So that's something I know about myself that if I
Yeah.
can't get that in a role, it's an automatic no for me.
Yeah, I love that.
So I think that's kind of the next one that I think about. And then in the love and belonging section, I think sometimes this is a little bit harder, but I think a lot about when I'm looking at roles or I'm looking at work, I think a lot about culture fit here.
Mhm. Yeah.
So do I feel like the values of this organization or this role aligns well with the values that I hold and that I have? Because I feel like that's really what gives you a good sense of belonging is when you can really get behind what you're doing. Um,
Yeah.
and I think that that fosters good friendships then too, because you're happy about going into work or contributing in a way that you feel is meaningful. And then the next one, I think, is self-esteem. So this is always a big one for me. Being a high achiever, I'm always looking for careers that provide me with an opportunity for advancement, achievement.
Mhm.
But I think maybe a more subtle piece of that is how do your achievements get recognized? Because sometimes, like, it's great to have them, but I think that just having them sometimes isn't enough for people. So, how do you kind of celebrate those wins? How does the company celebrate those wins and recognize them? And does that align with what you want as the way you want to be recognized too? And then I think the other big thing that sometimes is a little bit hard in this section is the need to be a unique individual.
Mhm.
I think a lot of times working in corporate sector, you can kind of fade into the background and just become a number.
Mhm.
And so kind of assessing how does that not happen in this environment or
Yeah.
like how is there that sense of connection that still exists where you can feel like an individual within the organization? Um, that one, I'd have to say I'd like to develop a little bit better process around that because it's really
Yeah.
hard to assess something like that until you're in it.
Mhm.
But definitely something that I kind of keep top of mind as I'm getting used to a new work environment. And then that last one, self-actualization. I think about this as like, do I, I went into nursing to like make a difference to help people. And so I think that this is very much tied to kind of the ethics that I have and kind of in that love and belonging stage. Is the company acting in a way that I feel like is ethical? Is it causing me harm because it's asking me to do things that I don't agree with or
Mhm.
that I object to? And of course there's like the big examples, right? Like the breaking the law stuff,
Yeah.
which that's a different thing. But there's kind of the more individualized things, especially when you work in an industry that you kind of know of like, I just don't feel like this is a good practice. And when you're
Hmm.
working for a company that has an operational uh, guidance that maybe dictates the practice that you don't like that's gonna kind of rub on you after a while. So things like that, or like opportunities for creativity.
Hmm.
And I love asking questions around that for any like potential jobs that I have. A lot of times, what that looks like for me is exposure to other types of roles. So, hey, does this role give me an opportunity to like learn a new skill in this other role in this other skill
Hmm.
set? Because then I get to tap into my creativity that way.
Right. Yeah, looking at like where's the overlap. I don't think it's been probably years if it's ever happened, but I feel like I've never had a job interview or looked at a company I wanted to work with or do a project with without asking, where are we going? Right?
Mhm.
How are we going to get there? What is the North Star? Not what are like, so I'll ask, what are we working on now? What are the big obstacles? What would be a big win immediately? But then I also ask, what does the successful picture look like in your mind for 5 years, 10 years, 20 years? Because that helps us align with, is that where I want to go?
Yeah. Yeah. And I think it's yeah, I mean, I think it's great, like big picture, super helpful. I think sometimes if you get an opportunity to ask like in a less formal way too, you can get
Mm,
more of the like individual pieces around it, more of
yeah,
kind of that culture piece too. That's so important for finding something that really fits with what you're looking for.
right. Yeah. What kind of questions do you ask when you're
Um,
looking at the culture piece and kind of the more specifics, like you were saying? Because I
yeah.
love that.
Well, I ask, usually like my go-to questions are kind of like I said, around the physiological things. So questions around what does your overtime policy look like? Like, how often do you have people staying late? How does your leadership prioritize work-life balance?
Mm,
How often are people taking PTO at this company? Do they have a hard time taking PTO? Because that's a culture too. So I think about things like that. And then those are kind of the baseline ones. When I think about more of the culture fit, I think more about like why questions,
yeah.
like working here. Tell me why you like working here. You know, how is your relationship with your coworkers? Some of those questions around achievement. So, how do you recognize like your high achievers? What does it look like to get a promotion? So some kind of like baseline questions around that to kind of get a sense. And then camaraderie on the team. If it's a manager, I'll usually ask about conflict resolution. And I don't know if you have done a lot of behavioral interviewing questions, the ones that are
Mhm.
always start like, tell me about a time when.
Yeah.
Um, some of the best advice that I ever got was when somebody was like, why don't you do that to managers in the interview stage, right?
Hmm.
Ask them back.
Yeah.
That tells you a lot too. So that was a big takeaway that I had, that I think can be applicable to any industry too.
Yeah. I think it's a great shift to look at. So many people go into the interview thinking, do they like me? Will they like me? Am I good enough? Right? It's kind of more reflected on giving them all of the power. But I've encouraged a lot of people I've spoken to go into their thinking, do I like them? Is this for
Mhm.
me? Are they good enough for me? Because it goes both ways. We do want to make sure that we are what they're looking for, but we also want to make sure that they are what we're looking for. And that does fit inside of kind of this trajectory of as we look at our needs and the hierarchy and go through our own checklist of this is where I'm going and this is what I want to experience right now. Does that align?
Well, and I think sometimes when you have that baseline of like, okay, this is where I'm going, it's really helpful when you go into those interviews because then it becomes a question of like you said, does it align? And if it doesn't, okay, no hard feelings. Like it's not a
Mhm.
reflection
Yeah.
on me or my interview skills or
Right.
my, anything like that. It's just a doesn't fit, or doesn't align with those goals. So it kind of takes some of the pressure off when you view it in
Mhm.
that lens.
Right. Yeah. It doesn't have to mean anything. We don't have to make up a big, elaborate story to justify why it didn't work out. It just wasn't aligned. It could be by a few notches, a few clicks off of what we were looking for, right? And that's okay.
And it's taken me a while to get there, but I think it's really empowering when you can go into an interview, you recognize that it doesn't align, and then you can just say, you know what, thank you, but it's not gonna work for me. It doesn't
Mhm.
align. And I've
Right.
never had a bad experience telling someone that either, too. I think it's a really good, I don't know. I think it's helped me feel more bold in my ability to kind of say what I'm thinking and advocate for myself.
Yeah. Well, it's huge because people do, they want honesty. I mean, who wants to be lied to, or who do you want in your life or your team or your business that's there to people please or just tell you what you want to hear versus doing what's actually right for them? Because honestly, if they go into the career and take the job and it wasn't quite right and you weren't honest, what's going to happen? You're going to
Yeah.
get resentful, you're not going to perform, and you're going to end up eventually leaving, maybe not on great terms. So, who does that serve? Right?
Yeah, exactly. Well, and that's like how I view it too, of like ultimately I'm doing us both a favor by
Yes.
speaking up because I'm being true to what I want and the things that I want. And I'm saving you the trouble of putting me through all of the hiring and the training and everything like that, just
Mhm.
to lose me later, and
Right.
having to do it all over again. So, yeah, I will say I think that there is a certain level of privilege in being able to make those decisions,
For sure.
right? Like having the flexibility. Sometimes sometimes you just need to do it to make ends
Mhm.
meet, which
Yeah.
going back to Maslow's hierarchy, like serves a purpose, right? Meeting
Yes.
theological needs.
Yes.
Um, so there are some scenarios where like I wouldn't recommend that, but I think it's like if you have the flexibility and you have the ability to do that, and you're in a place where you can advocate in that way for yourself, like do it, you know?
Right. And that's a great checkpoint to have with yourself too is, when you're looking at making a decision or leaving, not just doing it emotionally or in the moment or, you know, without really putting much thought into it, but checking that graph and thinking, okay, will this sacrifice the foundation? Because if it does, it'll all crumble. If I can make this jump to satisfy this higher level on the tier, and the bottom is still intact and the foundation is there and my house is not going to crumble, great.
Hmm. Yeah. Yeah. And I think sometimes it's helpful to look at it in the context of like risk assessment too, I think.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right? Because when you think about like sometimes taking certain roles, like there's a certain level of risk involved with that.
Hmm.
So, like, what can you do to minimize your risk? And I think that's particularly true for those of us who have changed careers or like frequently changed jobs. There's a certain level of risk that is associated with that. Or look at non-traditional roles like working at startups or things.
Hmm.
So there always comes like a baseline risk assessment that needs to be done. And so I think sometimes it's looking at, okay, where are the things that are at risk? Like what boxes are they in? What things am I willing to tolerate? And what things am I not willing to tolerate as part of a risk? And then deciding when the reassessment phase is going to be. Is it still like, how is the risk level in a year from now? Do I feel like it's still tolerable? Has it gotten better? Has it gotten worse? Like, do we need to do a reassessment? And I think about that sometimes too with like sacrifices. And I think that exists in every role, right? There's sometimes sacrifices that you have to make in order to get the role that you want. But I think duration in that sense is really important about how long am I giving this thing up, like for sleep, for example, how long am I giving up not sleeping well because I'm working odd
Yeah.
hours or I'm working long hours. Is that something that I can tolerate for that amount of time or not? Um, and then figuring out, okay, are we good now? Are we going to move on or are we going to stick with it?
Yeah. So as we look at these kind of, maybe non-traditional paths, when you have a path that's like, okay, I'm going to follow this kind of nudge inside and I'm going to listen to myself and listen to my body and my health and my mind and what's fulfilling me. How would you say is the best way to kind of handle that uncertainty that comes with having a path or creating a path that's not necessarily linear or looks like how it's supposed to or what you've been told maybe is quote normal?
Two big things in this category. First one is experiment.
Yeah.
And the second one is develop your trusted network of people.
Yeah.
So with the first one in the experimentation, a lot of that is really just finding the things that you like, finding the roles that best fit you. And sometimes like maybe taking on a little bit more risk so that you can create a role that works better for you, or you can bridge between two roles. Looking for maybe some of those more unique opportunities and getting more exposure to all sorts of different things that then you can utilize to kind of tailor what it is that you really want it to look like. Um, and then the other piece of that is having your group, your core group of people that you trust and that you can listen to their advice and know that it's good advice. I think especially when you're doing something in a non-traditional way, you're more likely than not going to have people that make commentary on that or say, "Oh, well, I wouldn't do it that way," or "That's not the right way to do it." And so having that core group of people that you can go back to and kind of sometimes bounce ideas off of or get feedback from or learn from their experience becomes really important, to kind of have some of that, oh, well, you're not following the prescribed route, fade away into the background because you're always going to fight that a little bit if you're not going through a traditional role.
Right. And, something that keeps me going, because I've, very similar to you, have not followed a linear path at all. And I feel like I've grown and learned more because of that. But I really remind myself kind of my, beating mantra that I, listen to and march to within my own head is I have to figure out what doesn't work to figure out what does work. So when people say, "Oh, what if it doesn't work? What if you fail? What if this terrible thing happens?" Great. Then I'm even more clear on what does work for me.
Yeah.
It's a learning opportunity, right?
Well, and I think, I think about the times that I've learned the most and more, I feel like it's so cliche to say this, but more often than not, I feel like the times that I have learned the most are the times where I haven't done something well or I've gotten corrected on something.
Mhm.
And those are the times that you're like, oh, okay. And then it really sticks with you because then it's like you go back and you do a post mortem on it where you're like, okay, what could I have done? How could I have made this better? Not in like a self-deprecating way, but just to
Mhm.
understand, like coming from a
Yeah.
point, how do we improve upon this? And what are maybe steps that I could have taken earlier on, to like change this trajectory? And that's knowledge that you can take anywhere. You can always use knowledge like that in your future. And then if you do encounter a situation like that again, or even something that maybe isn't like that, but has enough similarities, you're like, oh, okay, I can pull from that and really use that experience to inform what I'm doing. And sometimes like with the experimentation, I don't know, sometimes it's not even like a total failure, I would say. Sometimes it's just like a neutral experience, but it doesn't give you the like excitement that you're looking for. And I
Mm.
feel like that's okay too. That
Yeah.
all tells you something, right?
Right.
So I think looking at it from the lens of like what can I learn and what are my takeaways always is super important.
Yeah, that's so good. And so as a high achiever, when you look at balancing this, driven career, this trajectory, your professional life and where you want that to go, you want to be challenged, you want to learn all of these different things, but you also want to prioritize your health and find pockets of rest and self-care and self-soothing. How do you stay motivated and driven for that ambitious career while still reminding yourself, hey, I got to slow down. I have to take care of myself too. I have to sleep.
Yeah. I think I kind of mentioned this earlier, but I think the big thing for me is boundaries. Like you said, like I'm a go all in, I don't know, like 100% committed type of person. So because I know that about myself and I like tend to work myself too hard, having boundaries around like not working overtime, don't pick up extra shifts, don't look at emails outside of work, those types of things become really important for giving me an opportunity to rest. I think we had like mentioned about this. I think my big thing is like always feeling like I want to be productive. Um, and
Mhm.
that like leads to me overcommitting on a lot of things and
Yeah.
creating just some unrealistic expectations for myself on I want to get this done and this done and this done. And I just don't have the bandwidth for it.
Yeah.
And so I think like when I'm not having the bandwidth for it, or when I'm like so tired and maybe I do have the time, but I can't do it,
Mm.
like that's telling me something too. And it's that I'm not getting enough rest. So, how can I add that in or be compassionate to myself about taking that time to rest?
Mm.
So, I think those are kind of are the big things, but also like those looking for the things that feed you, right? Like it's experimentation here too of what are the things that like give you energy just from doing them. So maybe it's socializing. I think a lot of it is creativity. You know, they say like creativity and nature are two of the biggest things that
Mm.
you can like get energy from. Spending time to go out in nature and relax there, or finding a creative hobby that you can do kind of more spontaneously off and on
Mm.
as a way of like resting and using your brain in a different way than it's used to being used is a way to do something without like doing nothing. It's a different type of productivity, you know?
Mhm. Yeah, well, it's just another mindset shift of, I mean, I had to go through this myself. I never let myself rest or play and would work long into the evening, early morning. And there's almost a sense of, if I don't, I'm not good enough or I'm not worthy. I have to prove myself right. There's some of that in there too, which is, a whole other episode on its own. But I just love this theme that you're sharing with us around constantly asking, what is this telling me?
Mhm.
If you can take rest and make that shift like I had to make of, yeah, actually I can rest and have, max chill days or a max chill evening where I don't have anything planned and I am resting and reading and filling my own cup and doing yoga and really taking that time just for me, where my former brain would have said, no, you have to do something quote unquote productive, but that is actually productive. And we can learn that through doing it and realizing, oh yeah, this is showing me that my body needs this, my mind needs this.
Well, and it's interesting that you said that because as you were talking, that was initially what I was just thinking. Like, yes, resting is its own form of productivity.
Yes.
Right? Like the creativity, the taking time to go do the things that feed you, like they're their own form of productivity. Because it's not doing nothing. Like you said, you're
Right.
pouring back into your own cup, you're
Yeah.
feeding yourself so that like when you are showing up and you are trying to do those things that are traditionally labeled as being, productive, if you will,
Yeah.
you have the energy to actually devote to it and to be able to do it well. And so I think sometimes like it's about the quality of it too. You can be productive and you can be doing things, but that doesn't mean that you're necessarily doing them very well or doing them in a way that's fulfilling. And so taking that time to step back and rest and do the things that feed you allows you to be more productive at the things that you're trying to be productive at when you return to them.
So good. So, if someone's listening to this and they are either considering a career change or maybe exploring some new ways to start prioritizing their health, maybe they haven't been considering their health for some time and it's kind of been put on that back burner and or maybe they want some more flexibility in their career, or they are looking for more happiness and fulfillment. What would you tell them as they can start to consider this and start to think about what could I do next if I'm looking for that next big shift for myself?
I think biggest thing is having patience.
Mm,
Patience and compassion for yourself is really important. I think, especially as high achievers, we're really prone to kind of have that inner critic and get the
yeah.
best of us sometimes. So, knowing that it's a process and that it's going to take time. I think the other thing is really keeping that long-term goal in mind. So what is it that you're working towards? What are those goals that you're trying to accomplish? And is the stuff that you're taking right now feeding that long-term goal? Even if it's one that you're not very comfortable with or you're not super happy with currently, does it serve a purpose in getting you to that goal? I think the other one that I kind of touched on this a little bit was considering duration. And so thinking about if we're giving something up, if we're making a sacrifice that is necessary in kind of that Maslow's hierarchy, how long are we comfortable giving it up with, and what's a
Yeah.
reassessment time frame? So I think having an end date in mind, so setting that for yourself or setting like a hard reassessment date so that it triggers you to sit down and reflect on it is really important, to make sure that we don't kind of slide into a role or a part of our life that has been sacrificed for years, or for too long. And now we're like really devoid of it.
Right. So before this has been so incredible, but before we let you go, I want to hear a little bit more because you mentioned in the beginning that you're working on some changes and transitions now currently. So I want to hear about that. And I also want to hear about how, of course, in the beginning, sometimes it's a learning curve and figuring out how to navigate all of this. But now that you've got that under your belt, you've done the transition numbers of times. How are you going to continue to prioritize your health and well-being and what really matters most to you as you go through some of these changes that you're going through now?
It's always a journey, right? It's always a
Yeah.
spectrum. So
Yes.
you always have periods of like, oh, I'm really rocking it today. I'm doing
Yeah.
so much better. And then other times you're like, I could use a little bit of help or a little bit of a reset.
Yeah.
So I think that that's where like that compassion piece for myself really has to come into play. I think when I'm thinking about like career trajectory, as well, I kind of mentioned this at the beginning, but I'm kind of bridging right now. So, I took a little bit of a risk. I'm working for a startup, and I don't know where it will take me. There's a lot of growth potential. So I decided to take that risk and kind of jump into a little bit more of an unknown.
Mm,
And then I have kind of my ICU job as my meeting those base needs that I can always use. So having that level of flexibility kind of gives me an opportunity for a lot of potential growth, which I'm really excited about. But I do have a reassessment time frame that I've set for myself. So I'll give it 6 months and then I'm going to reassess. How do I feel like it's going? Do I feel like I need to continue on this path, or what did I learn? Kind of all of those things. If I decide I'm ready to part ways, what are the big takeaways that I have from that? So I think that's kind of my big thing. And then when I think about that in context of like my health, it's always hard when you're making adjustments to kind of figure out, because it messes up your whole routine, right?
mhm.
So I have to think about like, how do I adjust this routine and find like the new normal for what I'm doing? And so for me, what that's going to look like is setting some more boundaries, like how many hours a week I'm working, what days of the week I'm working. And
Mhm.
then looking for those things that feed me that kind of are, so doing some of the things like scheduled that all help feed me. So, for instance, like I'm taking sailboating lessons this
Nice.
summer, right? So something to feed me that's fun and
Yeah.
scheduled. So it's forcing me to take a step back from working on like my career goals and giving me an opportunity to rest, learn something new, try something different, feeding that creative brain, giving good exposure to nature. So I think looking for opportunities like that. And I know I need structure. So that's what I look for. Not everybody would, but I do.
Yeah.
So making sure that that's kind of built into my everyday as part of my transition.
Beautiful. Well, thank you so much for being here today. This was so valuable. I just love your perspective. Let's all go out and listen to the nudge of our intuition and what makes sense for us. Go out, try it, take action, reassess, and constantly ask ourselves, what is this telling me? And be open to learning and just understanding a little bit more about ourselves and the world around us. Thank you for braving the inside of your mind with me. The better we understand ourselves, the more deeply we understand the world. And as our awareness grows, life just gets better and better. If you've enjoyed this episode, please take a moment to leave a review and share this with anyone else you think could benefit from listening. A quick reminder that the content shared in this podcast is for informational purposes only. I am not a licensed therapist, and the discussions here are not a substitute for professional advice. If you're dealing with a specific issue or need personalized guidance, please consult with a qualified professional. Your well being is important, and this podcast is simply a platform for sharing insights and experiences. I appreciate you spending this time with me. Until next time.